Welcome to Shardcast. What is Shardcast? It's the Brandon Sanderson podcast. Who's Brandon Sanderson? If you've clicked on this video, you should know that. We are a podcast. We do theories and fun things. We do all things Brandon related. And today we're going to talk about Wind and Truth related things and Roshar related things. But first, we're going to introduce ourselves. And we'll start with David.
Hello. I am Windrunner on the forums, and I'm here to talk about the true history of Roshar that they don't want you to know.
The one true history of the one true Roshar on the one true podcast. Is there a One Ring joke I can fit in there? Probably not. Also, on this episode, Joshua.
Hi, I am jofwu, and I thought I had something else to say, but this introduction is so cursed that I cannot think about much else.
Hey.
It's just
You're
like,
the timeline master.
It's kind of like a anti-Stormite, like the same thing, but feels just a little bit off.
Okay. The voice you heard accompanying Josh here was Verónica.
Hi, I am Cheyenne Sedai. This is going to be a fun one. I love history, so
okay.
Let's talk about fake history.
This history is all fake, and it's all messy. And finally joining us, we have Adim.
Hey, I'm Max, and I'm glad that our intrepid producer has passed into the beyond and is only with us as a ghost now, so that he doesn't have to go through this butchering of an intro.
Well, you say butchering, I say remodeling. What is there's no destruction here. There's only change of one thing into another.
What does it mean to be a true intro to Shardcast?
That is true. Yes.
I don't intro.
There's no spiritual ideal of the Shardcast intro. It is or we certainly cannot perceive it, right? We can only glimpse it through our cognitive aspects, which always introduce a bias. Anyway,
You found an intro unmanaged, I think.
That is incredible. I am Argent, aka Evgeni. And as we have subtly foreshadowed, we will talk about the history of Roshar as we understand it post Wind and Truth. Obviously, Wind and Truth spoilers. We reserve the right to spoil any and everything else that Brandon Sanderson has written, including his tweets from 2006. We probably won't stray very far from Stormlight, but, something to be aware of.
Cosmological stuff.
Yeah. Most likely no non-Cosmere stuff though. So if you're worried about that,
probably not. Yeah, I don't think we can find a way to fit the Cytoverse into this.
we have to stretch
this stuff may show up.
I mean, didn't Grace fit Reckoners or was it Rhythmatist? I don't know, one of those two into a very niche Cosmere episode once.
Well, she is built different. But anyway, so we're going to talk about the true history of Roshar. Hopefully you've clicked away if you are adverse to Wind and Truth spoilers. So as you know, we learned a lot about the history of this planet, and we saw a lot of that history. We were in spiritual realm visions where we experienced some of the most important events in the past. We saw some of those events through the eyes of God. We figured we'll sit down and we'll just we'll run it down. We start from the beginning and we'll come probably not quite up to present day because things get real boring after the Recreants where not a lot happens.
Do you not want to talk about when potentially the Silver Kingdoms fell? We can get into some real fun stuff.
Okay, we can probably get nasty with the last 2,000 years. We'll see how it goes. But
we'll see.
Most of the meat and most of the potatoes happen before then. So let's start at the starting. We have the shattering of Adonalsium, which we are told happens roughly 10,000 years ago. And then we immediately jump to Roshar in the very first Tanavast POV or Honor POV, which I think we are led to believe happens essentially immediately after, right? He doesn't
Yeah.
he doesn't
Mhm.
gallivant around the Cosmere. And what happens? What happens when he arrives?
There's definitely like some sense of time passing, right? Because cultivation comes after, which we can get to, right? And at the end of the
Mhm.
flashback, Odium arrives. So like there's a span of time happening there that's a little bit unclear,
Mhm.
which makes me like
Mhm.
not want to assume that he immediately came there, but it does seem like he doesn't talk about anything else. He's not like been to some other planet or anything, right? To hang out. Like it seems like
Yeah.
between the shattering and here, nothing else interesting happened, right?
Or,
he comes
if
here-
if he has been elsewhere, he hasn't lingered there.
Mhm.
And like
Yeah.
I think that like that heading that says like 10,000 years ago, like that's like at the beginning of the flashback, and from then until the end of the flashback, some time has passed. So the end of the flashback isn't exactly 10,000 years ago, because we know Odium has to do a lot of stuff before arriving on Roshar. I mean, you have the whole Dominion and Devotion thing. You have ambition. You have ambition and the whole class mercy. He does stuff. So I think there's a pretty big span of time that is negligible in the eyes of a god, but it's not like on the scale of like the time jumps we're making in these flashbacks, if that makes any sense.
So after the shattering, something about Roshar calls to, like the rhythms call to Tanabest, right? Like
The fact
this
that
is something about the planet that calls to him.
the fact that it's been grown entirely from equations.
Yes, I think
Is
that
what he calls out.
makes sense with kind of what we understand about how there are ways that honor is perceived to be kind of like a part of natural law and like,
Mhm.
like a rigid mathematical like system. I think that's kind of a satisfying little resonance there, like why the shard was drawn to the planet.
And not to go off into like the nature of honor and things like that, but it also illuminates or justifies the existence of Spren like the Cryptics or the High Spren, who are more mathematically oriented as well.
And just for anyone unaware, the continent of Roshar's shape is, I believe, the cross section of a Julia set. So there is a mathematical basis for the shape of Roshar.
A cross section of a Julia set that is notable for having been one that was on Wikipedia.
Yes. I believe, and in fact, I'm going to confirm that real quick. Yes. So if you go to the Wikipedia page for Julia set, which is a mathematical set that we don't need to get into because it's not relevant. There's a 6-second animation there that show, because I think it's a 4D.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a 4-dimensional set, and so the animation shows slices, 3-dimensional slices of that, and the shape of Roshar loosely, vaguely looks like one of those.
It's like a 2D representation of a 3D. Yeah. It's cool though. It is cool.
This is something that Brandon told us in his tweets in 2006 or whenever, somewhere a long time ago. And so it's kind of fun when he like works in an old word of Brandon into the text like this, right? Like here's the thing that Adonalsium did, created the world in sort of in this mathematical way, and now we kind of get to see this and show up in the books, which is fun.
We are also told this is, and I don't remember if it was this vision, but I think it was. We are told that this is one of Adonalsium's newer creations, which I think implies a certain measure of like maturity is perhaps the wrong word, but like if we treat Adonalsium as a craftsman of some kind who goes around and like makes planets and stuff like that, you would expect his newer creations to be more refined.
It also carries the implication that it may be unfinished.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
Oh, really? Huh.
There is there's a word of Brandon that he says it's 12 to 1300 years, 1,000 years old. I think I'm skeptical to like assume that like in his mind like that's canonical. He might have just been a number that off the top of his head he threw out, but it seems like maybe that's in his mind. It's a couple thousand years prior to the shattering, maybe.
I could see something like that being in Brandon's mind. Roshar is older than the shattering, but not like orders of magnitude older than that.
Something like maybe like Yolen, which seems to have quite a long history, at least potentially.
perhaps.
We don't know that much, I suppose. Another thing that I thought was just, an interesting kind of confirmation of discussions that have happened over the years is it seems like Ashyn was already populated when the shards arrived.
Yes.
It was not like they created people when they got there. So that's just a good thing to know about. We don't always understand why planets have people, or if Adenalcium left them there, if they traveled at different times. So just another data point.
Yep. So we have Honor arriving here. He likes the planet. He likes the rhythms. He likes the tones. He likes the singers. He perhaps feels a little bit guilty about orphaning them by killing their god, because at that point the singers, or the Dawn Singers as they're now known, worshipped the origin of songs, which was Adenalcium. And the other thing that Honor discovers here are the old gods. They are kind of big spren that are remnants of Adenalcium. He also finds lesser spren, right? So it is important to call out that things like nature spren and emotion spren are not invented by Honor or cultivation. They predate them, which makes a lot of sense, right? The singers bond with those sprens to change forms. So of course they would be older. But those old gods are the wind, the stones, and the night. And they have been, the way Honor perceives them is he thinks of them as shadows of divinity with instructions to protect, to shroud, to nurture. And then he remarks that the wind in particular resonates with him, and they kind of like each other a little bit. So there's the idea that the wind is the protector for some reason, and Honor wonders why that is, because the wind is so flimsy, which kind of suggests that the other two, the stones and the night, might be in charge of shrouding and nurturing.
I believe that's confirmed somewhere else. At least the stones nurture thing is confirmed, I think, in a Venli POV or something. So I think it's safe to say that it's night shrouds, stone nurtures.
I think it makes a lot of natural sense just looking at it there. And on Roshar without soil, stone is their soil. It is where, their crops come from and all their food. So it does make, I think that makes a ton of sense. But I really enjoy seeing, we see the Honor Spren and they've got this kind of connection with protection. And I enjoy seeing that same kind of thematic resonance going back even further, it's at least I find it satisfying.
There's the connection to protection, and there's also Syl has always had affinity for wind spren specifically, and that is another echo, that's another parallel of, the neighborhood of Honor includes wind and protection and Honor spren and wind spren. That's a kind of a packaged deal, kind of.
The wind protects because the wind will protect.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well,
hey, look,
sorry.
You can't rule it out. You can't rule it out for sure.
We saw a vision of the wind have be aware of the present day.
There's some weird stuff that the wind talks about. That one weird thing in particular that, weird to me, that I'd like to bring up when it shows up in the visions. But
okay,
well, stay tuned for Adam's weird thing. Anything else that we want to mention in this first vision?
The other thing that he Honor notes when he references the three main planets that are in the Rosharan system, discounting the 10 gas giants and all that. He says, I was too intrigued by a third world, more distant from the sun, a cold, dark place. It could support life, barely. It had a curious property, a core of a strange metal that attracted investiture, calling to my soul. Fascinating. I found that really, really interesting. The fact that presumably Braze has this core of investiture and that it's calling to Honor soul.
Core of strange
we associate Braze so much with Odium, right? And so the fact that it's calling to Honor soul, I find interesting, and I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it could just be Adenalcium stuff, and it would call to any shard.
I think it would call to any. I think what is happening there is it pulls on investiture, and so it's pulling on the shard. It's pulling on souls when they go
on the fused.
Yeah. So I think that's what's going on there. Things like this, where you're like, why would Odium have built this planet, in this system, are the things that make me think about the first. I think it's either the first or the second letter where Frost is saying like, we're children in like the workshop of Odium, and like he has put all these things here for a purpose, and so it makes you wonder like, okay, does Odium know that honor will come to this, to this place one day, and that we'll need something like this, but
well, we know that certain aspects of Roshar, when the shattering happened, aligned with honor, and I feel like Odium would have been aware of that when Roshar was created, that sort of the fact that the high storm is honor, or like it maybe would feel that it connects to a certain aspect of itself. Odium, that is.
Perhaps.
Like we do have very strange like planets in the Cosmere anyways. We have places like Canticle, for example, and whatever the grand apparatus and like other mega structures are that Brandon has referenced in WOBs. So I hope we learn more about braids in the back half and like what exactly this means. Yeah. It could be just another one of those.
Well, yeah, I think Canticle, this is too. Yeah, mentioning Canticle, this is like very similar to Canticle. It's not working. Yeah, it's not like in a dual system with another invested heavenly body like Canticle is with the sun. But I don't know. It's sort of like kind of this, and then also the fourth moon, which I think we'll get to, which sort of gives me the impression that, and also now that you mention it, that Frost quote about being in the workshop sort of gives me the impression that Roshar was unfinished when Odium was shattered, because it seems like they're sort of disparate things. Like Ashyn has floating rocks, seemingly maybe naturally. Roshar has the high storm. Braze has the center. Then like floating rocks, kind of Komashi-ish. They have floating rocks there. And the core here, kind of Canticle-ish. But
I wasn't fully sold on the idea of it suggests unfinished. And I don't know if I am, but bringing the floating rocks of Alashwa, as was Ashyn's original name, is an interesting point, because it does. I'm like, yeah, okay. You look at Roshar in isolation, and it's brutal, potentially deadly, although not as deadly at first. Storm. You're like, okay, well, that's a thing, whatever. But when you have 2, potentially 3 planets in a system where they have weird stuff going on, like floating rocks, one way to interpret that is, well, it's a cool thing. Another way to interpret that is, I didn't wrap up implementing gravity on this planet, right?
My sense is very much that Odium is like going around creating wonders. Like he's just going around and he's like, here's like a cool planet, and here's like another kind of cool planet with a different theme. And it's just sort of having fun with it. And like in my mind, what is probably happening is like, we see Roshar in this proto state before Honor has invested it. And, like there's investiture there, but it's not like, I don't know, or like particularly want to get into like, how strong is the wind compared to the modern high storm or whatever. They don't have like crazy magic. Like they've got, like Spren bonds with the singers and stuff like that. And probably on Alashwa, they've got something simple like that too. And we don't get these really complicated magic systems until these shards start showing up and going, here's power, or I'm investing the planet with power that's going to find ways to bond with people.
As is usually the case, right? We don't expect, it's kind of the, I know we have talked about, I don't know if we've done it on podcast, but like the difference between an arcana and uninvested art or a magic system, right? And the idea that, there's magic almost everywhere in the Cosmere, but it's kind of this background, low level, you can expect to see, people or sapiens bond with investiture essentially everywhere, because like a bond is something very simple and it doesn't usually come with a lot of power. But when a shard invests in a system, that just ramps up the scale hugely, and that's when you see dramatic things like the metallic arts or surge binding.
People everywhere are finding small ways to like harvest and put investiture to work in various little ways. Another thing that I thought was interesting just to see, to kind of like that explains things you see in the modern day is cultivation's relative disinterest in being worshipped compared to Honor, who is perfectly fine to set himself up as a god in somewhat in guilt of having killed their previous god, but also just like, I could be their god. I find these people pleasing, and cultivation is like, this is not for me. I don't want to do that. And despite the fact that Yasta references that there should be some cultivation religions in the East, and maybe there are, we see her agents, maybe some secret ones. There aren't very many. So it's interesting. You see that to this day, where most of them are kind of honor centric, especially in the East.
Interesting that the vessel that was worshipped as a god before becoming a vessel is uninterested in.
Well, she explicitly didn't like that. Right.
Yeah.
Which maybe in part due to the fact that she was a dragon and Tanavesh was a human who were in love. It's a thing we get confirmed here as well.
And the other and potentially final thing that we can bring up here is that in a way very similar to how the wind resonates with honor, the Song of the Night, the old god, resonates with cultivation, and she likes it.
There is kind of a weird, they seem to resonate with the wind and the night, but there's also a suggestion to me that like these old gods still associate also with Adonalsium to some degree. Like it's not just pure like the wind belongs to honor now, because when we see the wind in the modern day, it's kind of like, no, looking back to like, no, I remember the time like before these shards came. So there's something weird there that there's some connections back to sort of the idea of Adonalsium and sort of something more whole.
Yeah.
Well, in a very recent WAB episode, we talked about the idea of Spren dying or changing as perceptions are changing and stuff like that. And I think what's probably happening here is that beings of investiture, such as the old god, don't change as much, if at all, when kind of the source of their investiture changes or dies, as much as raw investiture might, right? So in other words, if there's just like loose Adonalsium investiture out in the Cosmere, at the time of the shattering, that investiture probably flips to be associated with, any one of the 16 shards. But if there are effectively Spren of Adonalsium out in the Cosmere, they are their own beings, and so they don't automatically convert.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, I don't have any concrete thoughts about it, but some parallels with Aethers jumps to mind of like things that are really old that are sort of elemental in a way that are sort of not completely of shards, or in Aether's case, not of shards at all. So they would say.
And along similar themes, with a wind theme, a night theme, kind of a there's like a stone theme that's not quite. It's not quite. Which is the canonical term for what?
Rosite?
Is it Rosite? Okay, I couldn't remember if that was Adim, right? Anyway,
Yeah, it's Rosite.
Yeah, I think that I also kind of wondered too here is sort of the, we've got cultivation with the connection with the night. We've got the wind. We've got honor. Does that imply that there is like a stone Odium connection necessarily? But we also have the context that the sibling, which is kind of, which I guess is there a lineage between? It's kind of a connection that I've drawn in my mind, but maybe that's not necessarily true.
I think that there's a specific connection between the tower and the stones.
Okay.
Yeah.
Benley talks about like the stone's memory and like their power, like when she does the whole like talking to the stones, I guess, in Rhythm of War. But I'd have to reread the scene to like parse it out more specifically than just this fake memory.
No, I think what you are looking for is actually from, I believe, chapter 21, when the sibling kind of gives the download of how things went down back in the day. And they say that they were created some 6,000 years ago when the stones wanted a legacy in the form of a child of honor and cultivation.
There it is. So,
there we go.
So I'm like, does that imply that the stones are sort of a resonance between honor and cultivation, and there's no connection to Odium there, and it's more like that? Or is that just not like it's just such that the stones doesn't really have a specific resonance with a shard in this system?
I don't see any any association in the book between the stones and Odium. Odium doesn't like come to Roshar because of the stone or like something calling him there. Like he comes there to mess with
because of honor.
I think the closest you can get to that, which I wouldn't say is close enough to make an argument, but it's kind of the idea that when Odium is bound to the system, Tanavast notices with horror that Roshar accepts and adopts Odium in the same way that it has accepted and adopted honor and cultivation. And so you can see like, oh, Roshar, the made of stones, like that kind of thing. But I think that's a stretch.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
Speaking of Rays arriving on Roshar.
Hopefully the final thing that we touch on in this like 10,000 years ago vision is kind of the scope and the magnitude and the duration and the span of that vision. As we mentioned earlier in the episode, there is an implication that time passes and it is only the start of the vision that is 10,000 years ago. The end of the vision can be anywhere from that point up until essentially the next vision, which is 8,000 years ago, which is Raze's or Odium's arrival in the system. And it is important to call out that over the span of this first vision, which can take up to 2,000 years post-shattering, honor and cultivation sense shards fighting and potentially dying. They sense this conflict out in the greater Cosmere, and they're like, okay, well, no, we're gonna hang out on this planet. So that to me suggests that at least one, but probably all three of Odium's splinterings have happened in that.
It has to happen in there because he arrives.
Yes, fair.
I would say that I would not rule out the possibility that he could have like left and came back quickly. Like Cultivation does that at one point, or she leaves and then she comes back quite quickly. And so like it's possible that he was like, oh, I see an opening, like here I go. But my impression is also that he is likely already killed Ambition, Devotion, and Dominion at this point.
Yeah. And the other thing is that I think that like that much happening in between gives me the impression that that span of like possibly 2,000 years is closer to 2,000 than anything like less. Like I don't know if it's exactly 2,000, but I don't think that all happened as immediately as it's made like seem in the chapter. Like I think it's a very big span of time during which like each of those killings happens. I don't think it happens in such quick succession.
I would certainly go with like, oh, it was at least 1,000 years. Like, because it feels weird for Odium to just like immediately off two of them and then spend the next 9,000 years not doing anything.
Yeah. What is your timeline, Josh? What's your assumption there?
It doesn't have those in there.
Oh, okay. But I was just talking honor and cultivation versus Odium arriving. It looks like it's like about 2,000 years.
And we do know that because the next vision is
8,000 years.
Well, then that does make sense. Okay, here. I had a this is my last thing, and it's a brief one, which is just to call out that they are coming here in violation of an oath. So Tanavast's power is not pleased with that, and he tells it, deal with it. But that's just a very first kind of little bit of a crack in the relationship there. And while they're trying to not interfere and they're saying, oh, we're not interfering with one another, they are technically not doing what they're supposed to be doing at this point.
Yeah. That is true. They are, from the very beginning, oath breakers. And someone might argue that they got what they had coming.
Reserved.
But as we have mentioned a couple of times already, that takes us to our next Tanavast vision, which is about 8,000 years ago. And at this point, I do want to just take a brief interlude in these visions and call out two things. One, I think that we should not take these as like hard dates, right? Yes, we are in the point of view of a shard, and you can make an argument that, oh, they are supposed to know. We are also reading a book. And so I don't think this is meant to be, exactly 8,000 years ago prior to the present day, or prior to whatever, So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that we've for a while now known that Rosharan years have a different length than the Cosmere standard. They are roughly 10%.
I've forgotten about that.
Right, roughly 10% longer than years as we think of them. Right, 500 days, 20 hours each, and each hour is I think 57 minutes. And so in the grand scheme of things, right, it doesn't matter if the shattering was 10,000 years ago or 11,000 years ago. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter if Odium arrived on Roshar 8,000 years ago or 9,000 years ago. So whenever Brandon talks about timeline, he tends to use 10,000 years ago as the benchmark for the shattering, which agrees with the relative timestamps of these visions, but that doesn't have to be the case, right? So I think for the purposes of this episode, we're not really going to examine that because it doesn't truly matter, but it is, just be aware that there is a potential discrepancy here.
And the other thing I was going to say is that, even though this is a Shard POV, in the end, it's still Tanavast. And Tanavast, in his own way, he is also biased. So, we do get a little bit of, unreliable narration. This is not, I don't think, question everything he says. I genuinely don't think so. But his opinion is coloring things and, how, these events are perceived, particularly, when you get into, the conflicts with Odium, and all that. Because, he has a particular opinion of race.
Well, we'll get there, and I think we'll get there very soon, actually. But so that interlude aside, we come back to the next vision. 8,000 years ago, the arrival of Odium in the system. What happens when that happens?
Nothing much. It's kind of I don't know, it's really funny that he shows up and he looks around. And he's like, I'll go to this other planet and hang out there. And then Honor's like, okay, hi, bye. But yeah, so he goes to the other planet, right? He goes to Ashyn, called Alashwa. Thank you.
Alashwa.
And he hangs out there, right? And so Honor kind of looks at it and just doesn't like the guy, and so he's thinking maybe I'll go over there and do something. And Cultivation's like, no, honey, stay home. And he's like, okay. And so they continue to hang out on Roshar for at least some period of time.
Is this where we get the first inkling that there's an inherent hostility between the powers, Honor and Odium, or is that later when they have later confrontations?
I think that's later. I think the hostility is not inherent to the powers necessarily.
Yeah, because my impression was that
learned.
That they are actually not incredibly hostile, which is why retribution is able to be made, because they can work.
I thought that there was I guess I'm thinking of something that we talked about in the retribution episode of
maybe there's another quote. There definitely could be.
I mean, there is the idea that eventually the power of Honor dislikes the power of Odium. Vessels notwithstanding,
yes,
right? But I think that is learned behavior. That is a consequence of experience, right? It is.
Agreed.
And the thing that we talked about on the episode was the idea that the power of Honor, which is the power of rigidity and oaths and bonds, learns and finds out that the power of Odium is very much against all of these things. It doesn't care about bonds or connections between people. It cares about conflict and strife, and it will not uphold oaths, and instead it will betray, and it will fight, and it will incite conflict. And so
yeah, and that tracks with this description of race. Tanavast says, Race had the air of a being who did what he could get away with. A man whose sole scripture was a request for a bribe, which obviously is against the power of Honor as well. Besides Tanavast not liking Race, it makes sense that eventually these powers would be even more in opposition as they learn more about each other.
I do think that this chapter does a good job showing kind of the inherent relationship between Race and Tanavast, where Race shows up and Tanavast is the one who really he is the first one to do something. Race shows up and you can call coming to the system a provocation. That's fair. but like he shows up, he's like mean mugging him. Reyes sets up, and Tanavas shows up, and it kind of like pokes him, and you're like, okay, like this is really. And do I believe that Reyes knew exactly that was exactly how it was going to go? Yes, but but it's just kind of symbolic of kind of their characterization. Where Reyes is pretty clever, and Tanavast is bold but predictable. Potentially,
it definitely gives hints to their pre-shattering character dynamics.
Yep.
And it was interesting that I didn't like. It seems that Tanavast. I don't know where I got this impression, but I thought that Tanavast was sort of a bondsmith, the equivalent of a bondsmith in his like pre-shattering, not job, but it seems that he was just tanned leathers and made stuff with leather. Yeah. So it was interesting.
Definitely interesting, like especially when you kind of wonder how people who came to be the 16 came to become them.
Yeah, that's always an interesting conversation, right? We have a literal tanner. We have this utterly despicable being. We have an infamous healer in Iona.
Yeah.
We have a couple of
dragon god,
a couple of
Metalantologists.
Shodel, Metalantologist, the Great Dragon God.
You have Hoyd.
Well, yeah.
So, Hoyd was in the group regardless of not saying Shard.
I'd count him.
We're going back. We're going back to the true history of Roshar. This is the true history of Yolan.
Yeah.
I do. So I do want to call out a few things that happen. Yes, Honor himself doesn't do much in reaction to Reyes showing up in the system, but roughly in this time span of 8,000, maybe up to like 7-ish thousand years ago, there are things that are happening, right? The history of Roshar, there are events that transpire. One of that is that Honor and Cultivation, inspired by the old gods, the remnants of Adenalcium, and also the Spren, the little spirits in this system or on this planet, end up making some of their own, right? This is when Radiant Spren or Greater Spren or True Spren, if you want to call them that, or most of them, I should say most of them, and the being created. The Bondsmith Spren are a bit of an exception to this.
Yeah. And
but,
there's also
Honor Spren, High Spren, things like that.
And there's an interesting mention too of Cultivation talking about how she's kind of disappointed that they're so human-like, in their creations here, and she wants to create something that's a little more unconnected, which I think is kind of just like you can see the first thought bubble of like the Night Watcher coming into existence there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
And it also shows that Honor Spren and Cultivation Spren do actually have a reason for calling themselves that beyond hubris. There is the Radiant Spren, not including, they created 7 True Spren that were all of the orders except for Bondsmiths, Windrunners, and Edge Dancers. And then they made the Honor Spren and Cultivation Spren. Then they decided to get weird with it and make some unique Spren that weren't like a life species.
And it is worth pointing out that one variety of Spren was born of core cultivation alone, cultivation Spren, right? In counterpoint, and at her urging, I created one variety almost entirely on my own. And so also he calls them my angels of honor, which brings the word angel into the Cosmere dictionary. And I think fused or singers are described as devils. So that is a thing that now exists on Roshar, but we're not going to dwell on it. But it's kind of the idea that cultivation Spren appear to be purely of cultivation. Honor Spren appear to be only mostly of honor.
It makes me wonder if he's got a similar problem to what preservation and ruin had, which that they could not create alone. And maybe
yes.
I can see cultivation certainly being able to create alone, but honor needing like a little bit of help to like kind of give it just like that last push, but and maybe not, just a thought.
That's very similar to how I think of it, right? I think an entity purely of honor's investiture might be like less alive just because of the nature of honor as a shard. Obviously, we have the Spren of the Storms, the Stormfather or the Proto Stormfather, but that is an avatar of honor, and not like a spren in the strictest of senses.
Yeah.
And so I do like to think that you need a little bit of like ability to grow and change in the spren.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's a kind of slightly alternate reading to this passage, because after this, Honor says they loved the wind for reasons even I could not fully fathom. And so I think that there's a possibility that the wind may have been involved in Honor's friend specifically. I don't know how it would tie in exactly, but the Stormfather sort of being aligned with Wind Spren in a way that I feel the Night Watcher isn't quite aligned with Cultivation Spren. There could be some line from Wendell that I'm forgetting that draws
he calls her
connection.
Mother, which is not a term we've heard another type of spren use with cultivation that I recall. Specifically, yes. I could be missing some of those. So there may be such a relationship, but we don't know as much about the cultivation spren. I feel like, yeah, I think that it's just kind of like there's like investiture, like thematic resonances going on here. Like they care about like this. The Honor spren love the wind, and they love the wind spren, and they love protecting, and the wind likes to protect, and like it's all kind of just, you know, like it's the same reason that Honor was drawn to it, because it's all sort of just thematic. Like for whatever reason, this is how these things are connected here. You know, which eventually comes down to just like the themes that Brandon ultimately wanted to explore with this series. But
I agree that this is more thematic than anything else. And Tanavast is just an idiot who forgot that the wind resonated strongly with him. And so he's like, well, what is... wind like me like wind. Why Honor spren wind like each other?
Well, and you know, like, and it's still like they're just also just similarly mysterious. You know, he's just like, it's, you know, it's still just kind of that same ineffable thing. I think another important thing that's happening in this time period is that Honor is kind of like really establishing himself pretty firmly as the god of the singers on Roshar. And I think that's when is this when they name themselves the singers? Yeah, because he teaches them to sing the songs to the stones, and they begin doing a sort of proto stone shaping, which Venli has had visions of in the past, where they're able to build homes, like sculpt tools out of the stone, just pretty simply like working out like clay before it solidifies. And so Honor's doing some interesting things with them at this point.
Yeah, the stone shaping is really cool because it's just a fascinating power, and like just knowledge of how to do it has just disappeared. So it's always fun to, I don't know, get some more lore about how that was used, how it came to be.
Yeah. Do you think that this could still be done? Like, could this still be taught, or do you think this is something that's kind of like, you know, shriveled as, you know, investors sort of grow and replace each other?
I guess as it still has.
That's probably probably not anymore. Yeah.
I think it will also involve the stones, and we know that the old gods have also lost power over time.
I'm inclined to think that it maybe still could be done. I don't have any like guesses on like what the mechanism for that is. And I don't know, like, you don't want your stone wards to be like everybody can do your power, and you know, you just like are special. You know, there has to be some kind of something that makes it matter for the radiance. You know, so to be better at it or more powerful or something. But I don't know. I could see it being a thing.
Oh yeah, I don't expect it to like be imminently rediscovered or something. It was just more like, I wonder if this is still a thing that the magical architecture exists for or not.
I think it just turned into the surge binding version of stone shaping.
The stone does say that like new things are built on old things, you know.
And part of the radiance is like putting limits on the powers, right? So that people can't destroy the world. So
that's true. That might have been part of the restriction. Is like, okay, we're not going to do. I mean, obviously he wasn't letting them get too crazy with it, even still. But
you're right.
Speaking of destroying worlds with surge binding,
soon. Well, so this is happening on Roshar. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on Roshar itself, but meanwhile, Reyes is making himself the god of the people on Ashyn, and having them fight each other for fun.
What a horrifying thing!
Right? No.
Yeah.
It's not for fun. It's not for fun, right? It is important to call that out. Even this far back, like 7 to 8,000 years ago, Raze has been on this bandwagon of I'm going to have people just fight until I have, because the survivors are going to be the ultimate warriors, and then I will use those ultimate warriors to go out and conquer the rest or fight the rest or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that has always been his plan for Roshar itself, and that is called out even in previous books, right? That the Rosharans, because of the cycle of desolations, have become just exceptional, and that is in addition to surge binding, which is unlike most other invested arts in the amount of power that it grants to people.
Yeah,
I wonder if Raze like foresaw the powers of surge binding before. It almost seems like he foresaw the potential before Tanavast did, because Tanavast is like doing stone shaping stuff, but Raze jumps right to microkinesis, and I mean, I guess part of that is he's okay with destroying a planet or two to develop some super armies, and whereas Tanavast isn't. It's sort of interesting to me that Raze seemed to grasp this was a possibility specific to the Rosharan system, I think. Because he like showed up on Roshar. And so like, did he show up because he knew that he'd be able to do surge binding in the system?
Yeah, that's something I was wondering earlier. Like why come here? And I'm not going to discount the possibility that he shows up here to kind of mess with honor and cultivation. Like maybe they were going to be his next targets. But there's also the possibility that Roshar has always been a little bit special, right? One of the newer creations of Adonalsium. We have the weird Braze planet. Maybe there are things about the natural, kind of the natural laws of the system. You do have this, at the time it wasn't a high storm, it was just a powerful storm, but it did seem to carry investiture with it. So that's kind of an infinite source of energy.
There is always in my mind the question of, obviously Raze managed to take over a dual shard plant before and successfully kill them. It is still like a 1v2, and this is like a very tight pair. So, I always thought it was kind of a big risk to come to Roshar. And potentially, if there is like we kind of see on Ashyn a little bit and on Roshar these kind of like the magic is like fundamental forces themed, and like kind of seemingly quite powerful. So like if maybe that's a characteristic of the magics of the Rosharan system, maybe that's something that Raze is interested in exploiting. So he's like, okay, maybe I'm gonna build a little magic system. And it's going to, it's really going to be pretty powerful because of the characteristic of the Rosharan system.
Because if you look at the list of shards that Odium went after, like other than the fact that cultivation is a dragon and he may see that as a threat, I don't know why he wouldn't have gone after Valor before, like honor and cultivation. And then of course, like Valor is also a dragon, but like
so. I can offer you.
I'm not sure if it's like the most like logical like next step. I think there are other shards that are more of a threat, like the intent to Odium than honor and cultivation. I don't know. Like there's something that feels a bit off. Like, I mean, sure, maybe. And who knows what Raze's thought process was. But it also feels like on a different level than the ones he'd initially gone after, like Dominion and Ambition and, well, the whole thing with autonomy. Like, sure, he ended up killing Devotion with, like, the whole Dominion thing, but I don't know if he specifically targeted Iona or if she just happens to be there and he was like, well, I'll take 2 shards.
I think... I felt like there was some implication at some point that he'd gone after his opposite essentially of like kind of a sort of love as opposed to
I believe there is an implication in this book, like when cultivation comes back and the reports that they're gone after Iona. There's kind of this idea that I think for a long time we had assumed that Odium had gone after Dominion because of
Dominion.
because it's a dangerous shard to have out in the Cosmere. I think this book implies that it was more about Aeona, presumably because like, you know, not to go power of love, but like the ability to inspire and to empower people with with devotion, like that can raise a serious opposition to him.
Yeah, would have been potent potentially. Yeah, I think the other candidate that, you know, maybe is explainable depending on, it's always really hard to get into relative Cosmere planet timelines, is Ruin. Like that is the other shard that I think is like obvious threat when you're like throwing them out there. And I'm like wondering like at what point Ruin was kind of rendered impotent by preservation, but I don't know how that quite fits together. Or if, you know, like the two of them are just already kind of in a state of opposition. So he was like, that's left well enough alone for now. They're busy fighting each other. That's another explanation potentially.
The other kind of possibility for Odium here is, and I don't know if I believe that, but it's kind of the idea that, maybe Honor notices that he has been wounded. Odium has been wounded, right? And that's
right.
The implication is that it was one of the previous conflicts that resulted in that. I suspect ambition, but
exactly what I was going to say.
If we know that for a fact. And so it's possible that Odium is here not because of some like fundamental, like inherent power of the Rosharan system. Although I do like the call out. I do like the idea that the powers here seem to be more fundamental and more elemental than in other places, right? Because Metallic Arts, Sixth of the Dusk with the AVR, Komashi, Kantico, like the magic systems in those places are very like
niche, specific,
hard, let's say. Whereas the ones on Roshar are, you are manipulating the fundamental forces of nature, right? So there might be something to that. But there's also the possibility that Odium is kind of either on the run, probably not on the run, but like he wants to recover from his recent fight. And his options are, he either finds some planet out there that he hopes that like other shards just don't find him, which is reasonable. Or he comes to the Rosharan system that is already inhabited, and maybe he thinks that honor and cultivation are not going to interfere further. Like they've already broken an oath by settling together. Maybe he goes, they're not going to mess with me and further deviate from the original oath that we gave, especially with honor, the shard of oaths. And so he's like, I'm going to settle in the neighborhood and hopefully they will overlook, or like obviously they will notice him, but like he's like, maybe they won't interfere with me.
And like it also like lends itself to the ability to like keep scheming while he recovers, even while he's not like interfering directly, like with the other shards.
Yeah, I think at some point it really is mentioned directly too that he is here to like convalesce a little bit. So that definitely makes sense.
My impression is that he thinks very little of Tanavast, and he thinks, "Hey, look, I can go recover here and scheme a bit, and then when I'm ready, I'm going to tear them apart because they're suckers."
And so I think the final thing that I want us to briefly touch on again is kind of the empire that Odium decides to build on Alashwa, which is described as a bunch of city-states that come together into an empire, and races favored are they are going to overwhelm the planet. The idea is that they are crushing the resistance. Some of the people that they are crushing end up being actually Nail himself, whom I think is either a child or like a young adult, is the impression that I got from him. Like when they leave the big like console gathering thing. And his uncle, I believe, one Mr. Makibak.
The Amerigo Vespucci of
which is incredibly funny to me. But that's how a lot of these things happen, right? There's a name and it just kind of sticks around.
Yeah, it's actually not that out there. Like, you know, that's kind of the funny part.
Yeah, there's a ton of countries that are like that. I mean, like we are called Colombia like because of Christopher Columbus, Bolivia with oh my gosh.
Bolivar.
Yeah, but I'm forgetting his first name. Anyway.
Simone?
Simone, thank you. Anyway, there's a million countries that are like that. It makes a ton of sense. It's just funny to encounter this in a fictional world.
Yeah. It would be interesting to compare what we learn here with that myth about the origin of the Makabaki to see if there are any parallels there. But we don't. That is too deep.
Yeah,
that is not the true history of Roshar.
I'll put a post in the forum. Yeah.
I'm really super curious how long this went on, as well as like the war that comes after this, right? Because Odium is granting his powers to these people, so presumably they might be long-lived. This war could have been going on for generations, and like this is just like the end of it. I don't know, but it's interesting to wonder that, I guess. And then Honor speaks with Nail and Makibak and gives them his powers, right? And then like they are long lived after that. It's mysterious, I think, how long this is going on.
Yeah, there's definitely a bit of wiggle room in that, but Nail and I think Jezrien is effectively a contemporary of his, or at least is reasonable to assume that he is. But like both of them are probably like close to 8,000 years old by the time of current events.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we do know that Ishar was like the first one that Odium gave powers to. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Hoyd suggested allegedly. Or like I think the way we were told the story before, Odium tricked Ishar into experimenting with surges, but it was Hoyd, we now learn, that like kind of put Ishar in touch with.
Yeah.
I wonder if Hoyd has been like on Ashyn for the long haul, because he also is there for the Exodus. So I just wonder how involved he was in.
He may have spent like 1,000 years there, unless he like was there and came back later.
I'm inclined to think that Hoyd followed Ray's there. He didn't show up, and then Ray's just happened to go to Hoyd's world, right?
Yeah, I don't think that Hoyd would have been there before Ray showed up.
Yeah,
I think that's possible. Yeah,
it could go either way. I just I'm imagining that Ray's went there and Hoyd's like after this guy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna.
And it also could have been a multi-step process, as has been the case multiple times with this book, by the way, where it's not that Ray's shows up and is like instantly going, "Hey, I'll give you powers." It could have been he shows up and like he tries to build his empire with like he's a god, and he like directs people and instructs people and coerces people and stuff like that. And then one of the tools in his toolbox that he doesn't immediately reveal is the ability to grant powers. And then Hoyd shows up, there's a conversation or something with Ishar, and that he either tells Ishar or tips Ishar off, and Ishar figures out that, oh, we can get more than just like advice and direction from this god that showed up. We can get powers. And then like that thing happens.
I've got the quote just to hear what Ishar says. And granted, this is crazy Ishar, so it's a perspective. But this is from chapter 131. "I'm wise to Midias' tricks, child," Ishar said. "He was there when we destroyed our previous world. Did your wit tell you that he was involved, perhaps even responsible? He told us about the shards, and it was his talk that led us to first contact Odium."
Yeah, so maybe Odium was more subtle to begin with, and then Hoyd accidentally pushed the humans to.
Well, it certainly does recontextualize that one quote from Way of Kings, I believe, where Hoyd tells Dalinar that he would watch Roshar burn.
Oh,
and
yeah.
If he was doing King's Wit stuff, the equivalent of King's Wit stuff on Ashyn, and ended up seeing Ashyn burn, I'm sure that Brandon could come up with a reason that Hoyd would have to want the events on Ashyn to happen the way they did.
Here's a thought experiment. We do not have a specific date for. We know that Hoyd and Reyes were once friends, correct? At one point in the past, I believe so. Yeah.
Do we know?
Honestly, not
reading a letter.
No, that is honestly true. I'll tell you right now. I'm so sure.
Yeah,
of
I'm
this.
looking it up. Wait a second.
It's kind of.
I
Go to Hoyt's page.
no, I'm like sure it's on
Yeah,
there.
I thought that he like
Yeah,
always called.
Friends with Rays. Citation 136, General Sign Books, 2014. He asked for something juicy about Odium that no one knows about yet. Brandon Sanderson. Odium and Hoyd were once friends. And so
cool.
My question is, and that's the thing. So clearly a thing that we don't know much about because it was not super present. But anyway, we don't know when they stopped being friends. And so it to me, it is not super satisfying that like Hoyd is like Kingswooding it up, like in the court of Ishar and like accidentally mentions the shards, and Ishar's like, maybe I'll talk to these gods. But like, maybe Hoyd and Ray's are friends at that point. And he's like, hey,
I think that would be
there's
so
this god here, you should talk to him. He could offer you some stuff, and then what happens on like Ashyn is what causes that fallout, Just a thought.
That's interesting, yeah.
As a character dynamic, I really like it. Not 100% sure that's what happened. Like there's so much we don't know about Hoyd, but I like it as a idea. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, the fallout could have been totally pre-shattering. Like there's no way to know, but yeah, just a thought.
What I'm hearing is we need an Ashyn secret history.
The demand for secret histories just continues to rise.
Just exponentially, yeah.
Forever. We do, however, need to move on, unlike many of the characters in these books. And, well, I guess I shouldn't say that because they also need to move on. And the kind of the next time period that we need to cover is the destruction of Ashyn and the exodus or the escape to Roshar. And the timestamp that we are given for this is 7,100 years ago. That's the vision. That's the first vision that we see in the spiritual realm, right? This is Ishar opens the big El's Gate, and a small fraction of the Ashynite population escapes to a new world. What do we know about this time period, gang?
Well, there's a throwaway mention that Vettel was queen of her people and happened to be visiting Jezreel at the time, and she is the sole survivor of her nation.
Yeah.
So I have this wonderful little theory that she's wrong, and they do live. They still live there. There's still people there, and so she doesn't realize it. Yeah. But her people do still exist, which I think would be really kind of cool to find out. Yeah. But anyway,
Silence Divine is just going to be an interlude in Stormlight 7.
Oh
no! I reject that. It will be Secret Project 17. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But that it doesn't imply that there was no warning. Like whomever was near Ishar at the time is who survived, and everyone else was screwed. Or
they did reach out to Nail, right? Jezreel. Did he Elskate over? Am I imagining?
I think he Elskated over, didn't he? Let's see. Let me see.
I recall. No,
maybe not.
I think he was just walking a battlefield.
I don't know why I imagined that.
Oh wait, no, maybe it's because let's see. Okay, no, he says with luck we can make a portal and flee. So it sounds to me like maybe that they're hoping they can make it, but it doesn't seem like they're able to. They're sure they're going to be able to else call out of there.
But it's a pretty urgent thing. But they are able to reach out to his people, right? So maybe they're nearby. But there's a little bit of time to try and gather some people.
Yeah,
but it seems like it's in the scope of maybe not hours, but no more than days. Yeah, there's a huge sense of urgency.
I'm imagining big chunks of the world just destroyed, and then some that are just the conditions are just rapidly worsening.
Because this is coming on the tail end of almost 1,000 years of war. Depending on how you read the timestamps, but it's certainly generations. So maybe something dramatic happened, and they're like, okay, we got to go now.
The players involved are Jezreel and Ishar's people. They're the same ethnicity, if I'm not mistaken. You have Nail and the whole Makabak people.
Makabak, yeah.
Vadel is like the only of her nation that's there. You do have the Shen, so there's like a whole like group of Shen that seem like a little bit, especially culturally.
No, Ishara and Jezrien are Ishara is described as Shin-looking.
And Jezrien's more Alethi looking.
You could argue that Althman is what he is.
Yeah. There is a specific group of people that are called out as being precursors to the Shin, though. And
so, like when Navani is watching them come through the Oath Gate, there's like some people that come in at the end that are a separate group that are not part of Jezrien's that are like, oh, those are the Shin. So that and I think that's it, right? There's like basically 3 nations represented or ethnicities or whatever.
Yeah.
Are there any like?
Well, I think Jezrien.
There's like weird ones. There's like I think Sile specifically is one of them.
Jezrien represented an empire that had conquered a bunch of. So
I was thinking that
it's diverse.
He and Ishar are potentially 2 separate city states that have become that have conglomerated into this Odium empire that is now reaching out to its former empire enemy Nail and going, hey, we gotta go. Let's put our differences aside.
Yeah. And I believe that there was a mention of like, they said that there was like a lull or something in the like firestorms, but it was coming towards them. No Aether relations as far as I know, but it sort of did remind me of how like they were seeing something sweeping towards them almost in the sky.
Yeah, that's so when they meet with Makibak, Jezrien says, "You're alive, others live, bring them. The firestorm is returning and the very stones are melting in rivers of lava. With luck, we can make a portal and flee." You can read that a number of different ways, but
I feel so bad for the people stuck there having to find a way to survive. Firestorms and melting stones.
I mean, how do you? I'm not even gonna go into like
maybe I thought the storm was bad, but
ride a rock up there, and
they got up on the floating rocks, man. Like that's.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, it would appear so potentially, at least maybe partially. It's hard to say. We don't really know how their floating cities work still.
This does tie into that thing that I mentioned like an hour ago about the wind. There's an off mention that the Stormfather says that the wind might have corralled the parrots and gotten them to the portal, which, if true, is very weird to me because it implies that the wind is present on Ashyn.
No, Ashwa. Yeah.
I think it could just like reach through the portal. You know what I mean? Like it is like it is really like a connection in the 2 places and just kind of like call to it a little bit, like just extend its power in for a second.
I guess it depends on how many. If you think that there is a breeding population of parrots that happen to be flying over the battlefield when the Elsgate opened.
Don't think too hard about it. I will point out, however, that there's no reason for the wind to have been bound to Roshar. Because that's just not a concept that existed before the Shards agreed to stay here. Like investiture was just,
that's fair,
existing. So I do want to call out one thing from that kind of first or last meeting with Makibak, I guess, where they bring out or they bring up Zoral, the Voidbringer.
Oh my gosh.
Which like clearly that's the namesake of like Voidbringers later on. But I think
and
it's a fun thing.
Rest in peace, Zoral too. He's dead.
Yeah, rest in peace, Zoral. And he seems to have been the one who was the leader of the Empire, who was saying, "Join us," because they say, "Join us." That's what Zoral said all those years ago. So.
Because Jezrien specifically talks about like replacing him as king. Like I am king now, and I will be a better leader.
Yeah.
So
it looks like Mr. Zorro here was really drinking the passion fruit juice.
And we can sort of gauge a lot about the sort of even it's supposed like I would assume that this empire would be sort of the peak of Ashyn technology and all that, and they do not have a system of writing. They are even Jezrien, who is now king, unless they're, I mean, maybe at some point, maybe they sort of went through a desolation or something, the equivalent of a desolation, but he is wielding a obsidian spear, not a metal one. So either there was some backsliding over the 1,000 years of war, which is definitely possible, or it just was not as advanced as maybe some of us, I at least, thought it was.
And I think the other thing that might have happened, and like we don't know too much about Ashyn, like pre, like the Exodus and like what life was like there. Maybe there was like something about like the environment that forced them to develop their technology in a certain kind of direction that like left some other things as less like of a priority, because like I keep thinking about like the ancient like empires of like the Maya and the Aztecs and the Incas, like here in like Central and South America. Like they were incredibly advanced in things like mathematics and astronomy and building and all that, but there were other parts of their technology that are nowhere near comparable to what was going on in Europe. So like I think that's might also be like a possibility, and like hopefully we'll find out in like the Herald flashbacks.
That would be, I don't want to hope for too much. That'd be cool.
But like the Obsidian Blade also like specifically reminded me of that. Like when you brought it up like, in the pre-show, I was like, some of those survive in the real world, so we might get a case that's similar.
It is important to keep in mind that technology and the evolution of technology is neither linear nor like predetermined, right? Different cultures learn different things at different times and at different rates. So
I did like, and this is like not to I think maybe the Oath Pact vision with Navani or something, but they kind of point out how like different it is than what they imagined, and I experienced that too. I really enjoyed like their technology not being as advanced as I thought it was, you know, and they just come across and compare themselves with the Singers who are like more advanced with their stone shaping. I just was like a really cool aesthetic that I enjoyed.
No, that was definitely a really cool way to do it. Yeah. My only other thought is maybe they had a written language and it was one that like scribes knew or whatnot, you know, and like the ruling class became immortal, but they never knew how to write. And so like then all the scribes died in the wars and they were like, well, all right, you know, like we've kind of we lost that. Well, we'll work it out. But and I do want to point out to folks that the reason we know that maybe they had writing and it was supplanted, but like they learned writing from the Singers, and that was the basis of some of the writing systems that we see, like the glyphs and things that have kind of.
And Dalinar also, he asks when he's I think occupying the body of Kalak or something, he asks, "Hey, do you want to write some of this stuff down?" And everyone looks at him dumbfounded, and they don't know what.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, so they don't know what to do. They don't know what they're doing. Yeah,
they do have some cool hand signals. So they've got that going.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, so the humans arrive on Roshar. At this point, many of them have had access to surges in kind of this unbound capacity. They've completely messed up their old world. They've decided to move on. Ishar, either alone or with the help of people, unclear, opens a massive Else Gate, and that people and animals. Some animals, dogs,
a couple of dogs
who don't survive in the long run, stream through. So they come to Roshar. One thing that I think we did not expect, I think we expected that Honor and Cultivation kind of offered a safe haven to the Ashynites. That does not appear to be the case. Ishar just kind of followed the song or the tones of Roshar and found a new world, and they just happened by accident or by random chance to arrive in what would eventually become Shinovar. I think the mud fields is what the Dawn Singers call that area.
I cannot imagine things not growing in this mud field. To me, it is completely plausible that it's just mud. I'm like, no, things would be like mossy, like it would be, you know, like things would be
but I don't think it's real mud,
be.
though. I don't think it's real mud. I think it's like creme leftovers.
But like it's going to become soil, you know, so it's got to be like some sort of like regolith, like in my mind, but they're going to like kind of work in.
Well, this is on
whatever. I'll stop talking about soil because nobody ever cares about that.
Hoyt says, "Get a hobby."
It was as one like Joff mentioned, like there was a lot of like subverted expectations, for lack of a better term, and like the idea that even 100 years after the Shinovar was still just a sea of mud. I thought that, cultivation's probably going to show up and snap her fingers and, grass is going to sprout up. And I guess maybe that happened eventually, but they seem to have just left the humans to their own devices for a century.
Except apparently someone told the Dawn Singers to like accept them and help them.
Well, that would appear to be the old gods, correct? Because isn't that what the Elia Stele says? At least according to that account of what happened.
Our gods of spring and wind and stone.
Yeah, what is that? How does that go?
Yeah, I guess my assumption was that Honor told them to, but maybe I'm wrong about that. It's like the Singers like calling everything a god. We took them in as commanded by the gods. Okay, so
and the gods they reference, but the gods they reference in there are wind and stone when they're speaking about it. I know
like that Elodie mentions that he follows the spren of the wind and stone.
The old gods, yeah.
The old gods specifically.
Yeah. Although they're taking them in does appear to mean potentially indentured servitude, ultimately, like once they get to that, or like at least existing as an inferior or more class, or it's like servant class.
Yeah, there's some stuff going on. They're not like, but like at least they're not attacking them on sight as they come from, this burning world.
And they're okay in Shinovar. It's just if they want to leave, that's the kind of the string that's attached to it.
Because they don't care for Shinovar, because it's like this kind of worthless place that
it's worthless.
No one wants to live.
Yeah.
Yep. Incredibly kindly of them.
We kind of skipped over, I guess. So Honor went to Ashyn and was dealing there. In the meantime, the Singers on Roshar have spent a couple 100,000, however many years, without Honor as their being around actively, and they sort of start to fall back to the original, their previous gods, right?
Yes.
And so at this point, when the humans arrive, there's the sense is that most of them are still maybe a little bit loyal to Honor, but there's this growing group of them that are looking back to the old gods. So to me, it's not entirely clear if it's the old gods or Honor, maybe some of both, that's like telling them to act a certain way, but there's a division there that Odium is going to come and exploit.
And even that they're expecting one day an Alcim will return in kind of an interesting way too, beyond the old gods, their origin of songs.
And that's a nice payoff to Raboniel knowing the term, or referring to Ado.
Ado. For Ado's sake.
Yeah.
That's good shout. Still no idea where Raucalist came from, but
it's Brandon's fantasy version when he doesn't want to put that. He's like, I don't want this character shouldn't say the word aluminum. It doesn't sound right in their voice.
But yeah, so it could be either one, which makes sense, right? Because Honor was favoring a lot of some of the humans on Ashyn, so like he could have said things, and like the old gods could have said things because they just seem chill.
Honor did like just spend the last however long there, like helping them fight their war,
but most of the survivors appear to be coming from Odium's empire, though.
Well, yeah, but I just think in general, Honor, he is sympathetic towards the humans. He's upset with Odium taking advantage of them.
Sure,
he is. I think the end of like that POV though, I feel like isn't it kind of end with like until the humans arrive? Like I didn't get the sense that he like had called out to them in any way. Like I feel like like he might have been kindly to them once they showed up for sure. But
my impression is that they did humans did a lot of stuff on their own without any shards helping them or but the shards are kind of like a little bit sympathetic maybe on the side.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, well, I also believe I'm like, you would need a little bit of magic to kind of get the ecosystem really up and running that we see in Shinovar, unless you happen to bring along a lot of little bugs or whatever. But anyway,
there's one more thing I want to bring up from this time period. And that is the kind of the state of Roshar. So the storm exists. There is a storm. We see that in that first Dalinar vision when he is he is Moash, right? He is the singer Moash.
Yes, yes.
Which is amusing. But like so they hunker down because they're like storms coming. And the way he describes it is as a strong but not life-threatening downpour. Kind of as a part of the storm or on the coattail of the storm, the wind shows up as like this shimmering in the air. It is interesting that the wind in that scene speaks with plural pronouns. They're like, we are the wind and stuff like that. And then a bunch of like windspren trail them. But they are like, the wind is not, or the winds are not, I don't know. They're not the windspren. The windspren are a separate thing. But there's that. There's one interesting thing that I will point out here that does not belong to this episode. Is kind of the sense of warmth that Dalinar feels both times. The wind passes through. So it's in this vision, and then later on, I think 50 years later, there's another vision in which he experiences the storm and the wind. That sense of warmth, the second time around, he calls out as feeling familiar. And that has to be a reference to like the sense of warmth that he feels a couple of times when he like gets these weird visions. They're not visions, they're like sensations almost. So like there appears to be some association with like, you know, the beyond or Adonalsium and warmth. And there's something there that maybe we eventually, when we have like a Dalinar episode, we'll talk about. But the storm was there. It was not, at least in that moment, in that vision, it was not as deadly as we know the high storms to be. There is a later vision where it is described as more powerful, and the wind explains that humans of this time, or people of this time, would like pray to honor, and honor would modulate the storm. So I don't know if this first storm that we see is just normally this weak, or whether this is the result of honor weakening it around the Dawn-Singers. That is unclear to me.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I feel like it's, in my opinion, it's likely the latter. But, you know, I guess, well, you know, that's interesting to think about.
That's possible.
There's some interesting parallels to how the high storm manifests in Shadesmar, with the shimmering in the air and the feeling of reinvigoration that comes after.
Sure, perhaps.
Yeah, although, you know, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe I kind of feel like maybe it was just a little calmer, and it just wasn't as big a deal when the storm came.
So the other thing I'll call out is like when Dalinar is having a conversation with the Stormfather in like kind of at the end of that first vision, the Stormfather talks about the old gods, or specifically the wind, and says they're no longer relevant as humans, poorly adapted to this land, began to fear the storm above all else. And so it took on life, became an adversary, a new demigod, or Roshar.
Okay.
So that could suggest that at the time of the arrival of the humans, the storm was just like an earth, like an earth storm, right? And then as humans began to fear it, it took a life of its own, and like it intensified.
That's kind of my read on it. I think that makes sense. I don't know. There's a part of me where I'm like, would they really fear like a periodic gentle storm? Like they really come to view that as an adversary. But, you know, maybe it's just a thing.
I do wonder if that storm was already like at least somehow invested, because it's usually like investiture, the one that ends up like starting to like think for itself and all that, when there's like a lot of it, and, you know, be influenced by the thought of people. So I don't think that would have happened if the storm just wasn't invested at all. And people just feared it. Like,
oh yeah, no, it's got to be invested, because like I think they're using the change form still. They're still dropping Krem, most likely, in my opinion, almost certainly.
The flora,
you know,
and fauna of the planet are dependent.
They rely on it.
For a lot
yeah, like the storm is part of the ecosystem. Yeah, I think the wind is just like associated with it. You know, like it's almost like a little bit of like a natural phenomena. I think I'd have to think more about it, but that it's definitely something interesting there. Another thing I wanted to call out too is that it seems like at this point the night is kind of like fading away, is not being worshipped as prominently by the singers, if at all. They're not called out in the Ilia Stele, and essentially when the sibling is asked about it, like she says that the night left and few loved her or even spoke of her, and then she was replaced by a being of the same essence. So this is a thing that's, you know, it's unclear exactly when that happened, but at this point it doesn't seem like they're talking much about the night anymore.
Yeah.
On the topic of the humans fearing the storm, and we know that singers, because they're closer to like the cognitive realm, they have less. I feel like they would have a harder time imparting their like collective perception on things. So I wonder if this is like when the idea of the storm having like a rider of storms kind of personification became a thing, was when humans started thinking about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the rider of storms, but I do want to, because we are talking about the storm, I do want to transition us into the next segment of history, because the start of that is extremely relevant. And that is kind of 50 years after the arrival of the humans. And the reason I want to bring us here is because that Tanavast vision, 7,050 years ago, opens with I, the Almighty, rode the storms, imprinted myself on them, made them an avatar of me. A word used by the gods for an aspect of themselves that works within certain self-determination. I'm going to shove that sentence off to a future avatar cast. It's not the same for mortals. We can think many thoughts, blah, blah, blah. Here I created a spren who was at the same time myself. Myself if I were free to just exist. It was not fully independent. It was not fully me. I savored its simple joy. So that's the Stormfather, or some proto-version of the Stormfather.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I would maybe call the Rider of Storms in my mind. Like, that's maybe when that figure would be emerging for the ancient singers. I think
that's reasonable.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable. Because, like, up until, the previous vision, there wouldn't necessarily have been kind of a presence in the storms outside of the wind itself.
Outside of the wind traveling.
For the Dawn Singers to kind of establish this figure of the rider of storms, it makes sense that it would be this around this time or later, obviously.
That does tie into like this. The listeners believe that the rider of the storms betrayed them, right? So like this kind of ties into like back to their whole belief that honor kind of turned their back on them.
It left them to gallivant on Ashyn.
The point of sort of Odium coming in and poisoning the well and getting them to his side and the humans turning against them. I think that's how that fits in my mind.
Perhaps, yeah. Let's figure out what happens at this point, right? We are 50 years after the Exodus, after the arrival of the humans. Reyes is now with the Singers, as determined by honor finds him there. So he's followed the humans, and then he's like, okay, I don't care about these humans anymore. These Singers they're more advanced. They are more numerous. I'm going to go and win them for myself.
But he says that Odium turned to the Singers because the Singers felt abandoned by honor.
Well, that's an opportunity to exploit, right? He goes, oh, these people, they don't at the moment they feel betrayed by honor, so I'm gonna go and steal them from him, essentially. Around the same time, Cultivation has discovered the fate of Aeona and Sky.
Yes, her and Sky. Yeah, her little trip.
Devotion and Dominion. I think Honor found out about Ambition earlier when he went to Ashyn. And so the original Roshar and Shards, Honor and Cultivation, are like, this cannot stand. Odium, he's stealing my followers, he's killing my shards. And so they go and confront him on a mountaintop. And that's kind of the first binding that happens in the system. The details of it are a little technical, but I think the TLDR is the three of them agree that they're going to stay in the system. So this is what binds Odium to not the planet Roshar, not the planet Braze, but to the greater Roshar system, which is important to keep in mind moving forward.
Yeah, and prevents Investure and Spren from moving off-world for a long period of time, ultimately.
By binding the shards, it binds all of the extensions of those shards. So the Heralds are stuck, the Fused are stuck, presumably Void Sprend are stuck, the Unmade are stuck, all of that. That's why the Ghostbloods cannot just take Stormlight off-world unless they unkey it from from its shard, and so on. So the three of them agree to stay here, and they also agree to limit how much power they give to their followers because of what happened on Ashyn. And I think there are just a few kind of like fuzzy details in this. But the short version of it is there's a limit, and you can, as long as the total amount of power that you give to your people doesn't exceed that limit, you are fine. And so you can invest a few people very highly, or you can invest many people kind of more lowly.
Yeah. There is this like one point where like Canavast hesitates. And so first he says, like, with these restrictions, no mortal would ever be powerful enough to destroy the planet. And then he thinks, unless, no, that was ridiculous to consider.
That's him going, unless I die.
Unless I die. Yeah, that's what he's thinking about there. We later learn. So that's the possibility. So if there's no vessel, the power can grow.
The power, yeah.
The restrictions are loosened, and they can do crazier things, which has been a risk that's been alluded to a lot in the books over the years, that something might happen. Although we've never really seen it.
It's interesting that Honor just like immediately like shuts down that line of thought, even knowing that Odium has like killed other vessels.
Yeah, but
so I don't know. I guess it just Honor's overconfidence.
Yeah, you are in the perspective of someone who goes, "I God found."
Yeah, I think it's his overconfidence, but it's a fun little detail of like personality. Just as a way to like bring in like that whole caveat of like if he dies with characterization, and he just never thinks about it like again that like serious. He's like, no, just immediately shutting down that line of thought.
Unacceptable outcome.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna I can you can sympathize with someone going, I'm not going to confront the possibility of like my own mortality, right? Especially when I am a fragment of I'm a god.
Yeah, he's got good reason to believe, like, that he's tight with cultivation. If it came to a fight, they would probably win.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh no, this is where we find out about Ambition's death, because like they look out and they see the wreckage, which we don't need to spend time on in this episode, but there's certainly interesting stuff in there.
Yeah, I think you were right though that he found out back when he was on. They mentioned Uli Da back when he was on.
Oh, because Odium says good.
Yeah, that's when he finds like, because he's wounded a little bit, and he's like, I had to take out a little of the competition.
But him looking at Ambition's, the battlefield where Ambition died, is related to Honor contemplating what a clash between him and Odium would actually entail for Roshar and the surrounding system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am seeing that like the first time either like Ambition's name or Uli Da's name is mentioned, it's both the same one in chapter 104, where he's talking to Race about like killing Ambition. So I don't know.
104 is
comment
when they are on
Ashyn it.
Yeah, 104 is on Ashyn.
Okay. So. Oh my god, the size of this book. Like, I forget that this is so much later.
What like, chapter 104?
It feels like we're so early in the timeline.
Also known as 2/3 through the book.
Yeah, well, that's why. But like 104, like the number just feels so much later. I'm like, is this really this early? Yeah. Apparently it is. I was like, is there not any mention earlier? It's ginormous.
Anyway, so that's what happens there, right? So they. The shards are bound. They agree to limit their power, and then they just kind of go their merry ways a little bit.
Core does threaten Race to like, okay, like do this, or we'll deal with you like Adonalsium dealt with you. Honor does comment that a clash of gods would be terrible, and he understands why Adonalsium didn't like fight the 16.
Yeah.
So,
I think at that point, Canavast is sort of thinking. Like he's seeing his wife threatening to blow up the planet to kill Race. And he's like, I don't know if I actually want that to happen.
Yeah. Like they're very much trying to avert. Like everyone is kind of on the same page that they would not like to not destroy Roshar and you like continue to plot here. But
Raze is okay with the idea.
I guess so. But like but he's like persuaded to it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
he's like, okay, I do like the singers. Like, they are interesting tools. Okay. Ultimately, between that and the threat of other shards coming to nuke me, and it not just being like kind of a close fight, like a blowout,
Yeah.
He's on board.
Or like as a drag, and she specifically uses her draconic voice to like threaten. It was like that it's enough that Odium does feel threatened, even if you wouldn't think that like cultivation's power is one that would otherwise feel threatening.
Well, he knows that it's a 2v1, and he
it's
is
a 2v1.
Yeah, like he very correctly identifies that a clash between them will destroy the planet, but he will lose. Like, all three of them know that this is going to be the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so they're just looking for a compromise.
The only other thing that I think would be interesting to call out is just that when they swear this oath, like, Honor's power kind of surges out of him and sort of seems to like seal it, which is an interesting moment that occurs as well. And that it's kind of unexpected by Danavat, because they're all the time learning new things about these powers, which is kind of a fun aspect of these flashbacks.
Yeah, even so many years later.
In their parents' workshop, right?
Yep.
It is interesting that Honor's power is uniquely involved with like the oath. Like, it's not just a general, like, shard oaths don't always necessarily work exactly like this. Honor being involved matters.
Yeah, I did wonder about that, but I am going to table that specific thing to like a future Honor episode, because there is interesting stuff there.
Yeah, watch this space.
Watch this space. Stay tuned.
I don't know if there's other shard stuff to talk about, but while this is happening, this is roughly when down among the plane of the mortals, the first desolation is basically starting to pick up. There's the tensions between the humans and the singers has boiled over. There's been some violence that has happened, and we have the meeting between Elodie and Yezrian and Calix. They get together and say, hey, there's been this fighting that's happened between the Makabaki people and these people. And they're trying to ease those tensions, but ultimately this is kind of where they pick sides, and the fighting really starts to pick up between humans and singers in general.
And the reasoning that we are given is essentially a lot of the humans are kind of unhappy with the area that they are being forced to stay in, because nothing grows here, right? None of the plants that they brought from Ashyn are growing, because this is a huge mud field. None of the Rosharan plants are growing here, because this is a huge mud field, right? And not everyone is like listening to Jezrien. And so it's just a boiling pot.
Yeah, the heralds have lost the confidence of the people they lead for some reason. Not sure what that's about.
It's a bit unclear if, like, Jezrien says that most do not accept him as king, and so unless like there was a substantial amount of the original population were Makabak rebels, he seems to have lost the confidence of most people.
Well, Makabak could have, like, in the past 50 years or so, he could have gathered popularity amongst the survivors of Ashyn as like, hey, we were on the right side all along, and so that's
yeah, we were right to resist Odium. Like, I feel like they are like, that's probably what's happening a little bit. It's like they are kind of like the popular side. That is like, these guys messed up here, and we're gonna go make a new land and not stay in this horrible mud pit. And the heralds are selling. The mud pit can be okay, like,
and so they go beyond the mountains. A singer dies. A bunch of the rebels die as a result of that. Elodie, who seems to be some kind of a leader. Whether that's a real one or more like I'm getting like a spiritual leader vibes from him, or like a respected elder type of thing. He's trying to put things to bed. It's not working. The humans are not listening to Jezrien. The singers are not listening to Elodie, and things are going to go bad.
Yeah.
El says that. Like Elodie. The wind and the stone. Yeah, Elodie. Oh my god. I don't know why. Elodie says that the wind and the stone and the old gods in general tell him to go east, and like whisper of like the warning of like, this is gonna turn bad. It's gonna just like burn up in conflict. but that there's nothing that like he can do about that because most of his people are like listening to Odium. And I think that's tracked with your interpretation of Elodie as like this like spiritual leader. So just think that like it isn't only that like the brewing conflict is obvious in terms of like, I mean all the precursors to conflict, but that the old gods are specifically telling Elodie like, get out of here, go somewhere else, do not mess with the humans because it's just going to turn bad for everyone. No,
it's interesting too. There's a mention, or it's like part of the problem that's happening here is like the new generation who was born on Roshar is incredibly unhappy with staying. It's like with staying within the confines. The older people are kind of like, hey, this is where we were supposed to be, and the younger people are kind of like, this sucks. Like the singers have a much higher quality of life than the humans at this point. Like just, and their craftsmanship is still finer. You know, like it is just not great.
The usual younger generation stuff.
We spend so much time with the heralds, it's easy to like lose that perspective that like most of the people are not long lived. Most of the people at this point were on Roshar, were born on Roshar. So like this is all they know. They grew up on this world that sucks. And hey, there's some nice land over there. What are we doing?
Yeah. Jezreen even says that apparent like the Makabak rebels say that the land east of the mountain is where the wind sings to the plants and causes them to grow, which I think is talking about the high storm, but they're definitely like
probably
seeing the grass is greener on the other side of the Shinovar Mountains at this point.
The grass exists on the other side.
Yeah.
Which is funny considering what happens with Shinovar later.
That's true.
Yeah, grass is gonna figure it out.
There's one thing that I wanna touch on here because we've made a couple of mistakes in recording this segment that will hopefully get cut. And that's kind of the apparent similarity between the names El, who is someone we are very familiar with and very fond of, and Elodie, who is a character that is introduced here. And I have seen people both in just kind of the general fandom, but also in working on the Coppermind wiki, either confuse or conflate or assume that the two are the same person. And I wanted to use this opportunity to talk about it and see how we feel about, hey, is Elodie El? Is it just like a coincidence that their names are similar? Are they like perhaps related in some capacity? What are we thinking?
So I have strong opinions, so I'll start. I mean, I think that they maybe are related because of the name. Like, I don't know why Brandon would give them such similar names unless they're related. The obvious, most people are like they're the same person. Obviously, I don't think they are because it's been 50 years since the humans arrived. El mentions that he was present on the day they arrived, so he's at least 50 years old. Maybe if he was an adult, he's 60, 70 years old. As a singer. The Oath Pact is not for another 50 years. And when that happens, I'm getting a little bit of ahead here, but the Fused are like a relatively new-ish thing, it seems like, at that time. That's the reason that they need the Oath Pact, is because they can't fight Fused anymore. And so like it's just a long time. He's either very old when he becomes a Fused. He could have died, and then like there's a long stretch of time where he's like Odium like hung on to his soul, and then he became a Fused later. So like there's wiggle room there, but like the easy answer is it's not him. Raboniel was not alive when the humans showed up. Her grandmother saw the humans arrive. She's 2 generations down the road. She becomes the Fused. So to me, it seems like El is maybe Elodie's son or something like that.
Or grandson.
Yeah, wait, just to clarify, I think maybe I was wrong. You might have said L instead of Elodie when you were saying that at first. Maybe I just misheard. But it is Elodie who was a boy when the heralds arrived and must be probably about 50 years old, in his 50s now, and would be presumably pretty ancient by the time the Fused are showing up.
I just looked it up because I didn't remember for sure. Singers have a little bit shorter of an average lifespan than humans do, which is exactly what my question was. I was like, is it longer? Is it shorter? Is it about the same? So yeah, that tracks with what Steph was saying about
it is not only that. but also when we meet Elodie in this vision, the way he is described is like his carapace is, I think, graying out or whitening or whatever. Like he is described as an ancient singer or a very old singer at this point when he's like 50 or 60. So for him to have survived another 30, 40, 50 years and to have become the fused known as L stretches credulity.
Yeah, and like, you know, there's an interesting parallel between like a peacemaker turning into, you know, like the soldier of Odium that is L, but there's also an interesting father-son dynamic there too, if that's what the case actually is, you know, where the older generation tries to make peace, but the young generation chooses to become a fused, you know,
which is a little bit of what we have with the humans, right? The older generation, like the heralds, wanted to like stay here and try to make this work, and it seems like maybe it was the younger generations of people who never knew Ashyn and only knew this mud field are like, no, we want out.
You do have, as an argument against this, you do have L seems to be familiar with the heralds. I think when L kills Jezrien for like the fifth time, he calls him an old friend. So like they had a relationship there. And if the Desolation starts here and L is younger, like how did that relationship happen in the middle of like a war that was just starting? There's a window for it to happen.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
In the Oathpact vision, they talk about Jezrien's friend dying and becoming a fused, I believe.
And that is L
specifically.
That is
L, not Elodie.
Oh, really? Oh, I must have missed that detail. That's cool.
Yeah.
It is like this little mystery that's there that the book is not entirely clear on, and I don't know, hopefully we get that addressed at some point. I mean, presumably L is going to matter in the back half, so hopefully we get like a little
yeah, maybe he mentioned like his father or, you know, grandfather or something like that.
He just like dies off screen and we come back to like Yasna ruling Roshar in his stead, like
Odium's queen.
Yeah, Brandon's like, I went in a different direction. I changed my mind.
Oh God, people would be so mad.
Yeah, we've sort of been talking about or mentioning it, but it's confirmed when Ash it's confirmed that the heralds are aging very slowly when Ash says that she is over 60 years old. Her age seems to have been mostly frozen as like a teenager. Yeah. I think there's talk like once the Oathpact happens, Dalinar notes that the heralds do age somewhat over the 50 years between now and then, but it's like obviously they don't age 50 years. They age somewhat. So they're like at this point they're aging very slowly.
And that also fixes some of the age gap stuff that people were wondering about, like with like how old was Jezrien when he had Ash, and how old is Ash? And
well, honestly, one of the biggest
seems like it was 1,000.
It's always bugged me that it's like, oh, they're the same age when they swore the oath pact, you know, and it's like, how do they have like a whole like war, like, you know, within like a few years of just showing up, you know, because their age was slowed down substantially before the oath pact.
Yeah.
And it seems like as their powers that they were granted by Odium fade as time goes on, their aging is increasing too, which they are not entirely happy with. At least the older ones. Ash is probably fine. Ishar less so. Maybe.
Ishar's probably not thrilled about being, you know, 40 in the body of a 14.
Yep. And then there's also a small mention of Ash having cousins with Makabak's rebels, presumably her mother's side. Just based on
which makes sense, right? Because her dark skin has to come from, you know, it's not coming from Jezrien. So it has to come from her mother.
And then one other thing that shows up here, which is sort of, I guess, headcanon for me. I doubt that this will ever be confirmed, but Jezrien has what he calls a mark of debt from Nail, which is a stone carved with an ox. And I've seen some fun theories about the ox is actually one of those void binding symbols that someone like pointed out, one that looks kind of like an ox.
Wait, I'm sorry, on the void binding chart, really?
Oh my God.
Yeah, there's one that sort of has like a face with like horns coming off of it, and so
you imagine they're all Ashyn symbols. We're like that is so funny.
Oh, I think I know which one people mean. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay. But I think that what this is just like maybe a fun reference to the fact that eventually the Makabaki people will develop a very elaborate bureaucracy, and so they seem to be creating the beginnings of like a form of currency with these marks of debt, which Jezreel,
Yeah.
I believe, says that they're using this for everything now. It used to just be for cows, but
That's
They're
funny.
everywhere now.
I think that's fun.
I like that theory. Okay, one thing a puzzle piece that I just put together that I find to be kind of interesting that I hadn't thought about, or maybe other people had noticed it, and I was just me noticing it. The fact that Jezreel, who was leader, not eventual leader, high up among Ishar Odium Empire, has a daughter with someone from Makabok's people is an interesting little kind of like that's like a little story thread right there that we don't know too much about. But I wanted
history.
Ash flashbacks.
Ash flashbacks, definitely. Yeah.
Ash flashbacks. I mean, she has to mention her mother at some point, doesn't she?
One would assume.
Silly.
Oh no,
she is going to just refer to her mother as mother the entire time.
She probably burned in the fires on Ashyn.
I mean,
anyway,
that would be interesting to explore. There's a history there. That's interesting.
yes, yeah, that's good shout. So this was not a hard cut in editing that you saw. We just smoothly transitioned from the previous thing that we talked about, which was that we are actually going to end this episode here. This is all the history you're going to get, folks. I'm sorry. Nothing else happens for the next 7,000 years. No, we're kidding. We are stopping essentially right before the Oath Pact, and then we're going to have a follow-up episode where we're going to pick up with the Oath Pact, and we're going to go over that. We're going to go over the cycle of desolations, the last desolation, the false desolation, the fake desolation, the phony desolation, the truthful desolation.
Of the planes.
We'll talk
the
about
Shin invasions.
The Shin invasions. We'll talk about the Shin invasions, you guys. And maybe, hey, chat. Okay, no one else on the call. Plug your ears. Don't listen to me. I need everyone to plug their ears. Okay, so chat. Next time we might talk about the start of the foreign calendar. So, but don't tell anyone. Anyway, so
sure hope that Argent shared a very riveting and exciting teaser for next episode.
Chat's going wild in the comments right now.
Sure, Argent.
Well, the content you come here for.
Engagement on this episode is going to be off the charts. Anyway, so we're going to cut this here. But before we do, we are going to just do a quick round of, hey, do we have any final thoughts? Any things that we wanted to mention in this, like, I guess, first roughly 3,000 years of Rosharan history that maybe we didn't get a chance to talk about?
So I think we see a lot of the key points. So if you imagine the timeline, you see this happened here, and the dates and all that. But I really wanted to see more of the dynamics and the character arcs, and I presume we're getting a lot of that in Herald flashbacks. But I do worry because Taln wasn't around back then, and how young would have Ash been, even if she's aging more slowly. And so I want to see a lot of those dynamics, and maybe more of the politicking and the cultural stuff, between the Makabok side and Jezreel's kingdom that he took over, and all that. So hopefully we get that. I don't know, let's just wishful thinking.
No. I think you raise a valid point, though, right? We are
we're missing a lot of that depth, I think.
Yeah. We hang a lot of hopes on the Herald flashbacks, but our Herald flashbacks are Taln and Ash, one of which was born on Roshar, and the other one was a child when she arrived to Roshar. And so I think a lot of the Ashyn stuff is still going to be kind of secondhand or not as deep
maybe
as we might want.
Ash talking with her father or whatever.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, you can imagine, it's still unclear why you would make a child immortal. But it happened.
It was a matter of getting the powers.
And it could be just a consequence of
It's true. I guess I got the impression that they were just direct. They're you get a power. This is that was really the mechanism, was they were just kind of bestowing it on distinct individuals rather than something else. But maybe, I could be totally wrong about that. But anyway, But anyway, she's got the power, and like maybe she was a child, like when the war broke out. You know what I mean? Like that could be a perspective that you could still tell, and like she like wasn't like she was born like 20 years in. She was there from the start, and it might be if you want to know everything, you could still get some insight into at least
like a child's perspective is interesting because it's obviously very different.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also not going to understand like all the nuances of like the cultures and how like they fit like with each other and like all the politicking and these dynamics that are teased in these like visions and these flashbacks, but are never truly explored. So
yeah, and like in defense of Brandon, I will say, and not that he needs defense, but just that I think there's just no room to go into any like like we're getting
there's
kind of
no
like
room
low detail
book.
God POV.
I was not expecting that this book at all. I just hope that he's like considered it and like thought about like what that's like, because like even without like even in the books that aren't Herald flashbacks, since like he's always said like the first half is like of Stormlight is like the Radiants and like their history and all that, and the second half is like the Heralds. That hopefully that like even if it's not in direct flashback, like he'll consider that and like put it into the second half of Stormlight. Because if there's one like critique of Brandon's world building, a lot of times it's like the history and like the more like complicated dynamics instead of just like, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. I'm a history lover and I like enjoy a lot of those dynamics. Like I'm the kind of person that like loves to listen like to the 6-hour like hardcore history episodes for like those like personal stories and then zooming out and then going back in. That's why I hold so much hope for the back half in terms of like the history of Roshar. But I also hold my expectations down so I won't be disappointed if we don't get as much as I want.
Yeah. I think that like, Ishar is now ostensibly on our side as well. Like there are people who are around that have the information about exactly how some of that stuff went down. And so I do think that
like
we might not see it all.
Therapy sessions.
Yeah, we will. He's like, tell me about, let's dig into your relationship with Reyes, like, and just break that down.
How does Reyes make you feel?
How did you guys meet?
Stormlight 6 interlude like through line is just like Kaladin like having a therapy session.
Transcripts of their sessions.
Oh my god. Written by Cell with like
self-dictate.
That was the important plot point of why she needed to learn to write.
Brandon, this is the groundwork Brandon is laying, people. This is the plotting that's happening. Unbelievable. I want to say that I think that this is probably my favorite half, kind of like the Tanavas flashbacks, like this is at least part of the sequence that I find most interesting. And I think it's really, really successful. And the kind of interweaving that, that we're doing as we're going through it between Dalinar, what Dalinar saw and what was happening from Tanavas POV is really cool. It's fun I think you get a really good sense of like how things happen for the most part. Like obviously he's leaving some stuff that he's going to choose to dig into later. But I think it's pretty cool. Is the payoff for, there like I think people have talked about when you see how things happen, like you always say you lose the potential. Like there's lots of possibilities about how things went down, and now these things are being set down in stone, and it's cool to see, but you also lose something with that. But I think that the upside is kind of the cool thing that he's able to do with these two sequences coming together. This is the payoff for some of the issue, like some of the other things that go on where Dalinar and Navani don't have as much agency. This is the upside of that we get stuff like this. So
the Tanavas flashbacks, in my opinion, are written so well. These are just a delight to read. So I love exploring those. It's kind of interesting. I have some frustrations with it, but I like that we get these different layers. We're seeing like the visions at this mortal level, and we see this God level of what's going on. So that's kind of cool. One thing that I've always wondered about is like, what was Cultivation's involvement throughout all this? Because she's always been so silent in the books.
Yeah.
And we find here that she is even silent a lot in here because she's just really disinterested in a lot of it. She's very behind the scenes, like in her very nature, even back then. And so I think it is, while she is largely absent in a lot of this, she is in some of it, and I think that her involvement is interesting. I did note that they have their valley. She's built her valley at this point even that far back. And so it's just interesting to see, I guess, what her role has been in the background through all this.
And I think that's effectively their home, right? Their nest.
Their nest.
What AAKS calls it.
It's interesting that the perpendicularity didn't form there, but it's cool to see it explained, like why they're like, the valley's always had kind of this special feeling, and like, maybe that was because the dwelling of it's the dwelling place of cultivation.
Do you think it had green mist back then?
Back. Yeah,
maybe.
I mean, I'm inclined to think that she intentionally put it somewhere else for her cultivation-y foresight, whatever reasons. She thought she wanted it to be somewhere else. That
could be, sure.
It's also unclear how much control shards have over where their perpendicularities go, but that's not the domain.
So you have to move the crust and then readjust the mount and the magnetic pole shifts. That's the rules about moving perpendicularities.
I mean, it has happened.
I guess my takeaway would be 10,000 years is a very long time. I think that Brandon handled going through that. His choice of having one POV being God, who is like not very good at keeping time, and the other POV being people who are forced to skip with and like learn context or try and get whatever context they can as they go, was an effective way of navigating those 10,000 years of history while still giving us some nice lore. It's kind of hard to divorce my thoughts on the Dalinar flashbacks from my thoughts on like how the spiritual realm was handled. But just focusing on the visions themselves, I enjoyed most of them. And I agree that the Tanavast ones were good too. And I would just echo the desire for some way of exploring some Ashyn stuff in the back half.
Yeah, that's definitely something that this really piques my interest for, like a ton, because I'm just like, like, what are we, what are we gonna learn? What's life like there? But Brandon just loves to tease Ashyn. He'll never actually give us anything there.
Hey, the dream for Silence Divine is it lives in the hearts of man.
He's gonna have to rename it too. It's not even gonna be called Silence Divine, because he'll be like, I have too many silences.
No, but it's parallel to the Way of Kings Ketek.
Oh, what?
Silence above.
Above
a silence land.
Oh my! That is not a thing I've thought about in a long time.
That's a reach. Reaching.
Yeah,
even for you.
Well, it is. I agree. It is.
Yeah, I feel like that's like an old theory, wasn't it? Like, I feel like that was something somebody put on the forums ages ago.
Yeah,
I feel like it could be describing the death of the Everstorm and the
the
cultivation. So like cultivation goes out from under, Honor's tone goes out from above, and so there's like toneless above and below.
Oh, that's a good point too. There's a lack of the tone too.
Brandon did say in a WAB that it's meant to be like above a silent land is how he thinks of it.
Interesting.
Why we're talking about?
Anyway, we're not talking about God. We're not talking about King's Ketek.
Yeah. I'm done.
I think the one thing that I wanna like bring in as a final thought is I'm intrigued by the early timeline of like pre-Odium timeline and what that means for other worlds. The fact that Ambition was splintered this early on in the timeline. The fact that Devotion and Dominion were like Odium managed to incite a conflict between those two, and then just kind of swooped in while they were kind of distracted, and was able to like defeat them and shove them into metaphorical closet, stuff like that. So that implies, I'm not. And we talked about this on earlier, I think, on the Retribution episode, but that implies that certain things must have happened on Cell prior to all of this coming down. I'm not super clear on what those things are, right? But Cell would have had like history that included the Devotion and Dominion as separate entities. Well, so that doesn't give it a whole lot of time.
Potentially, but they do, there are, at least according to the essay, that happened in their prehistory. So they do not have records from the time when those shards died.
And
so it was quite
1,000
early.
years is a long time. Also,
That is
like,
also true. Yeah.
we see a thing like 10,000 years ago, and like obviously that's huge. But to think about our own history, and like 1,000 years is a long time.
No.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just the time scales that, as a reader, like you might not notice it. Then you put it into context, and it's like,
yeah, it's a staggering amount of time. It really is.
But yeah, so that's kind of where my brain goes. What does the timeline as learned in this book mean for other worlds and other books?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense why they've been saying this book will mean that they need to be making some of these final decisions about these timelines. We're really getting there.
Yeah, the master timeline.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming.
But I think that's going to be the end of this episode. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. We've covered about 3,000 years of ground, and we've done a bit of final thoughts. So let's go on and try to guess who's that Cosmere character.
This character is from Roshar.
Menace. Tien.
Tom.
Braze.
Hoid in drag on a horse. It's time for Who's That Cosmere Character? Caw.
Anyway, so after deciding not to do a bit, welcome to Game Show. Who's that Cosmere character? What is this game show? Well, you send in some characters, 5 of them. No, you send 5 clues and 1 character at wtcc at 17shard.com. And the clues and the characters need to match. You can't send 5 clues for Shallan and then the character is Adolin. That's illegal. And we will come for you if you do that.
Yeah.
So, but that happens, and then we read the thing, and then these nerds have to guess the characters for the clues. The clues for the character for the clues. So that's what we're gonna do. And the first one comes by way of email from Elijah Moss, who says as his first clue, this character is not human.
Axes the Collector.
No.
Damn.
So.
No.
Orisir.
No.
Silence's grandmother.
No. Clue the second. This character's only lines of dialogue are spoken while pretending to be someone else.
Dang, I was going to guess human, but
we know that this character is not human, though.
only dialogue is being so. That's so specific.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's almost like a clue that I have to ignore because I'm not going to be able to like get it until I figure everything else out. I'm like, okay.
Well, I'm sad I can't do the bit guess of human the Kolos anymore.
Like if it wasn't for the human thing, I would say like, is there like a one line like member of Shallan's gang, or something that? But
you want to guess Shab?
No, I want to forget about Shab actually, or I would like him excised, something like that. This is tough.
I want to guess like some random Sion, but I don't remember their names well enough.
I don't know. I'm just gonna guess it because I think it'll be fun. I'm gonna guess Allah, the Sion that's like kind of lying about who they are. And their Aeon shape changes. Maybe they are lying about which Aeon they are or something. I don't understand that really.
I think that's a reasonable guess. That is incorrect.
And it's also probably too recent for when this was submitted. Now that I think about it, but oh well.
Is it one of the scientists in Yumi?
I'm gonna need you to be a little more specific than
the
main one
with the tiny machine.
Yeah, the main one or one of his two like helpers.
I'll go with the main one.
You go with the main one? It's not the main one.
Because I literally have no other guess right now. Like, I'll go with one of the helpers. I don't know.
The other scientist? No. Also, do you want to guess the left or the right? No, it's none of the scientists that babysit the
See, if you had been right, we would have given you half a point for that.
Wait,
Nope. No, wait. So the clues so far are characters not human, and the only lines of dialogue are spoken while pretending to be someone else. Clue the third, this character is almost certainly a world hopper.
Almost certain. What the heck?
What about Accent with? What about her?
No.
Okay.
Also,
she's a human. Well, okay, but she's a Verónica mist. Is that?
Are they human?
I was gonna get something, but again,
Yeah, the human thing got me there.
human.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I was going to be like, does Phil count as pretending to be someone else? And then I was like, oh wait, he's human.
Still human.
I can't hold 3 facts in my head at once. Okay. What's wrong with me?
It's a triangle where you have to pick 2.
Yeah.
Is it the world hopping conjure who we haven't figured out who it is?
Oh.
Well, maybe if they had lines of spoken dialogue, but no, it's not that.
Well, this is a hard one. I have no clue.
It's a challenge.
Yeah, I need like categories that I can like whittle down and not like
Yeah,
category that I can't think of anybody.
exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, I can't even think of a planet. I'm like,
Like you
I'm like,
can't like process of elimination it.
yeah, I know.
That's why all of the clues start with this character is either
can
from
you-
or not from Roshar.
Can you say that Tensoon is always sort of pretending to be Orsar?
You could make that argument.
Is this Masaka?
It is not Masaka.
That's it. That's the problem.
Because
It's
I
like,
Good.
I don't
like,
remember. Yeah, I don't remember if she had any dialogue after she stopped pretending to be human.
I mean,
like,
she's
they
talking to
know
them when
she
she's
is.
going like
Yeah.
my face comes
Oh,
off.
that's right.
You know,
Yeah.
so like
That's right.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
It's like everybody I can think of. Like they.
Still a good guess.
Matters. Pass again. I need something.
Okay.
I don't want to sit here for the next 5 minutes and not think of anything good.
Yeah. That's
I know that feeling, brother. Clue number 4. This character knows an Elantrian.
Oh, thank you. I'm like something to grab onto.
Yeah, no kidding.
people who know Elantrians.
The reptilian guy who's pretending to be Charlie.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's him
Dang,
actually.
well done.
Oh wow,
Oh, that's a good.
nice.
I didn't think anyone was gonna guess that, but yeah, it is.
Well
it
done.
is in the
Okay,
well
words
done.
of Elijah himself. This character is the fake Charlie from the end of Tresson VMRC.
I was curious if that character had a name. That's funny. Hell yeah. Way to go.
And the
Good
final
one. Wow.
clue that we didn't get to was this character has been on a spaceship.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, that would have been a good one. That was
Yeah.
that was a solid set of clues. What a random introduction.
Maybe would have switched around 2 and 3, but you know,
Yeah, well, but this is not let's critique who's that Cosmere character.
Let's
That's true.
That's the character.
That's
Yeah,
a
it's true.
different game
Yes.
show
Yes.
that's coming up next.
Yeah, just a little
Yeah,
later.
it is
Thank you
good.
for
It's
this
just-
one. This is a great one.
Yeah.
2 was really hard. 2 was
That was, that was a puzzler. That was a stumper.
Elijah says, hello from presumably the distant past by the time this gets read on the show. This was sent just about a year ago, actually.
Nice.
So not too bad.
Yeah.
And also says, love the show. Thanks for all that you do for the community.
Oh,
And
thank you, Elijah.
Say
thank you, Elijah.
heart, but like the
Hearts.
millennial way,
It's a-
not the Gen
it's
Z
a-
way.
The
No,
Gen Z way.
nope. All of these
Don't
other
get
hearts are.
Don't
No.
get into the generation wars. Don't do it. We're not.
I
Everyone.
never do these unless it's like
Yeah.
memeing.
Is that
Anyway.
Is that the thing? I haven't even heard of that. Oh.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's a K-pop thing. I'm not even into K-pop. I just
Oh.
know it because you know.
Anyway,
Sure.
we have more Who's That Cosmere character to do. No
True.
more hearts. No hearts are allowed on the show anymore.
Yeah. Is it BTS?
Unless it is the heart of the
I have
level.
no clue. I just know it's a
Um,
K-pop thing.
Oh no.
Our next Who's That Cosmere character is going to come from one Tyler.
Hi,
Call.
Tyler.
Hello, Tyler.
Tyler says, clue 1, colon, this character is not a world hopper.
What was that first? Colon?
Tress.
Clue 1, colon,
Oh. Gotcha. Oh, gotcha. Sorry. I was like,
Cave school in.
Tress.
Adolin.
It is neither Tress nor Adolin.
Character's not a world hopper.
Not a world hopper.
Okay, this is when I immediately can only think of world hoppers.
Happens.
Siri.
It is not Siri.
See, I almost said Bavena, and then I'm like, yep, yeah. See, like that's how you get yourself. How about Elend?
It is not Elend.
That's all of us.
It is all of you. I am trying to decide how to handle the fact that there are only 4 clues.
Just 2 4.
Okay.
We're good. We don't need 4. We don't need 5.
Okay,
clues.
yeah, you didn't need 4 last time. Yeah, that's fine. If not,
Yeah.
I'll make up a clue.
This is extra hard. This is hard mode, guys. Come
Hard
on.
mode.
Whew.
Yeah. Clue 2. Colin. This character is very socially awkward despite having several friends. Also, I read that as several hands the first time, but it says friends.
What are you bragging about? Everybody has.
Nicaro.
It is not Nicaro.
Good one.
I guess I will say Renarin just to rule it out.
It is not Renarin.
Non-Balat.
Excuse me. He has those crab friends. Thank you very much.
I think several friends is a stretch for non-Balat. It's not him.
Is it Relaine to rule out the other one?
Oh, the other boyfriend? No, it is not Relaine either. Clue 3. Colin. This character is highly invested.
Okay. You're gonna have to say it again. What were 1 and 2?
Not a world hopper. Very socially awkward despite having several friends. Highly invested.
Is it Sazed? After he's
It is not Sazed. No.
I was like, if you went 2 for 2, that'd be good. That'd be pretty good. All right.
I would probably argue that shards just
Spook?
automatically become world hoppers. It is not Spook. No.
I was trying to think. No, there was no point at which Steris held the Bands of Mourning. I was like, technically, no. Just Marisi and Wax.
I mean, you could maybe make an argument that she is a little awkward.
I know. I think that's my thing. She's like kind of awkward, especially at the start. But she's got really good. Like she's made these really good friendships by the end here. Yeah. Well, I guess technically only Wayne is a friend. Everyone else is family. What about? I'm trying to think. Is Lightsong socially awkward? Like based on the society of the Court of the Gods, he doesn't quite fit in there, but he does have friends, the Tarachin gang, and I'm gonna go with Lightsong.
It is not Lightsong, I'm afraid. No.
I felt that was a low chance. Damn. Okay, 1 round to go. We may force you to make a 5th clue. We may do it.
A bit of a stretch on highly invested. Is it Shalon?
It is not Shalon.
If we get it in 4, we always knew we could get it in 4. And if we get it in 5, that's just only fair,
Clue 4. Colin. This character was introduced in the Secret Projects.
Oh.
There goes my guess.
Just what about just Yumi?
Yeah, I was wondering.
Masaka.
Well, it is Yumi. So
It's gonna be like one of my first guesses, and then I questioned myself.
I like sometimes it is just the obvious one. Yeah.
Sometimes it is Joan Stormlight.
Yeah.
Or Yumi Kumashi.
Yeah, it's a head game. You're like, are they faking me out or are they not?
And there's no clue 5. Tyler was apparently confident enough in everyone's ability to get this on 4. So we got him on 4. I don't need to figure out a fake 5th clue.
Thank you, Tyler, for crafting
Thank you for the confidence.
A WTCC that I would get.
With just like the perfect, it is a perfect path. It is not too short. It is not too long. It was like the foreshadowing landed exactly where it needed to land. So that's going to be the end of the episode. We've done some history. We've done some games, which is what everyone wants from Shardcast: history and games. Next time, or at least in a future episode, we'll talk about the rest of the true history of Roshar. But for now, we're gonna cut it here. But we give you an oath. There will be more. There will be more. We're not gonna break that oath because otherwise our podcasting powers might abandon us.
An oath or a promise, am I right?
Ghost, be gone, cognitive shadow.
Wow.
Something truly is wrong with the afterlife of Shardcast.
Yeah.
So that's the end of that. If you liked this episode and would like to show that likeness, you can like this episode on the platform that you are in. If you like us, you can show that likeness by joining our community in the various places that it exists in, such as our forums and website, 17shard.com, or our Discord server, which, in the words of Eric himself, is hopping and popping. So you can, so that's, the invite is somewhere, discord.com/17shard, probably. We are still away from social media because social media is a cesspool. But when we make our glorious return, it will be on Blue Sky. And
Capital R return.
Capital, yeah, we're gonna come back invested with internet. I'm not sure. Oh, Patreon. Yeah, you can give us money if you want to give us money. You can do so on Patreon. You can do that for as little as $1, but you can go. Sky's the limit. Hey, you wanna support us for $25,000 a month? You can do that. We just can't offer you much more than our highest tier, which is the $10 Herald tier, which is very appropriate for this episode.
If you're a rich Saudi prince, come to patreon.com/17shard.
I don't know.
We will create a tier for called the Shard tier just for you.
That is true. If you back us for
a month,
if you give us $25,000, we will create a custom tier for you.
That's a promise. That's an oath. No.
Consider whether that's a good financial way. Anyway, yeah. So that's going to be the end of it. Come hang out with us, right? We are the Brandon Sanderson fan friends family that you possibly don't have in your life, but you can have us in your digital life. So that's the end of the episode. Say bye, you nerds.
Peace.
Bye.
This was truly Honor's true history of Roshar.
1 out of 4 people followed my instructions. Farewell. See you next time.